Hey guys, tonight we drift back into a world of flickering candlelight, silken bedclothes, and more decorative pillows than any reasonable human needs. Picture this, a grand manor in the English countryside, where the stone walls hold a chill even in spring, and the bedchamber glows in amber hues from a dozen beeswax candles. You stand barefoot on polished wood floors, taking the enormous four-poster bed dressed in layers of embroidered covers, downy feather mattresses, and velvet bolsters you're not actually supposed to use. It's cozy, yes, but also a little ridiculous. You, an 18th-century aristocrat, lucky you, have just finished another evening of being fawned over at dinner, and now it's time for rest. Except aristocratic sleep was never just about rest. It was theater. You had to look like you slept well. Even if you didn't, you had to perform leisure. And yes, you probably won't survive this century without at least one minor scandal involving a bedchamber. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop a comment with your city and what time you're listening. Always love seeing where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You tug back the heavy curtains that hang from the bed's carved wooden canopy. Yes, that's real shell gilding on the spindles, and crawl under the covers. It's warm, a bit too warm, but the weight of all that fabric is oddly comforting. This is no minimalist sleep environment. Between the linen sheets, the wool blankets, the goose down topper, and the monogrammed silk coverlet, you're practically in a fabric sarcophagus. And yet, it's luxurious in its own overly committed way. Beds in aristocratic homes were massive, and not just because they needed to keep warm in drafty rooms. Size was part of the display. A bed had to impress. It was often the most expensive piece of furniture in the house, sometimes even more than the paintings or the piano in the drawing room. The height alone could be absurd. You didn't so much climb into bed as ascend to it, like a slightly sleepy mountain goat in slippers. And speaking of those slippers, they're by your bedside, lined with rabbit fur, hand-stitched by someone who definitely doesn't get to sleep in a feather bed. You step out of them and onto the warm rug, thanks to your maid who placed it just right while you were getting your face powdered and your hair re-curled after supper. Yes, curling your hair before bed was a thing, because waking up glamorous doesn't just happen, even when you're titled. Let's talk about those mattresses for a second. Feather beds were prized among the wealthy, often made of goose down, with the very best imported from colder climates. The more feathers, the better. But mainstream historical fact? Some beds had up to 3 feather mattresses stacked on top of rope-strung frames, like a Princess and the Pea situation, except the pea was probably someone's political ambition. Now, you'd think sleeping on that much fluff would feel like floating. Not exactly. These beds shifted. They sank, and the feather ticks needed constant fluffing, turning, and airing. Otherwise, you'd wake up in a human crater. That's why servants often flip the bedding daily, sometimes even airing it outside, which sounds like a lovely thing until you realize it was mostly to combat the lingering scent of warm bodies and tallow candles. Deodorant had not yet had its renaissance. One fringe tidbit: some aristocrats kept stuffed dolls or wax figures of saints under their pillows for good dreams. Imagine being wealthy, powerful, and still tucking in with a tiny wax nun to chase away nightmares. That's what we call emotional support relics. You glance over to the side table. A carafe of water, a little silver bell, maybe a small hand mirror, because checking your curls mid-dream is apparently not entirely out of question. Your chamber may even feature a faint floral scent, courtesy of sachets tucked into the bedding. Lavender if you're fashionable, chamomile if you were anxious, and occasionally dried orange peel, which some swore repelled evil spirits. Historians still argue whether this was more about superstition or simply masking the smell of old wood and unwashed linen. The room is quiet now, but you can still hear a crackling from the hearth and the faint creak of old timbers. In larger homes, the fire was kept low overnight, sometimes guarded by a metal screen to prevent errant sparks from catching the embroidered drapes. Those curtains weren't just for decoration. They helped trap warmth, essential when insulation was basically hope and faith in stone masonry. Outside the window, moonlight falls across the gardens and the hush of the countryside settles in. The candles gutter in their sconces, one by one. Your eyes drift up to the canopy's embroidered ceiling panel, perhaps stitched with cherubs or a family crest. This was the view most noble sleepers got to know well. The inside of a fabric tent built not for function, but for ego. You stretch, yawn, and sink deeper into the layers. The bed groans a little under you. Maybe it's the mattress. Maybe it's the echoes of someone else's dreams. Or maybe it's just the 18th century equivalent of a bedtime notification. Either way, you're not getting up again until someone brings you tea, or unless you roll out and land in your chamber pot, which, fun fact, is a story for later. You shift onto your side, pull the covers closer, and let yourself melt into the slow rhythm of noble sleep. It's indulgent, it's excessive, it's got fringe on the pillows, and probably a Latin motto stitched into the sheets. But for now, it's just warm. And for a moment, you forget that your hair is full of pins, your maid is sleeping 2 rooms away, and you've got a ball to host tomorrow. The first sound you hear is soft, almost too soft to notice. It's the whisper of fabric as your valet or maid quietly opens the shutters, letting in the pale gray light of early dawn. You blink against it, momentarily disoriented. For a second, you think you might still be dreaming. But then you hear the rattle of porcelain, the gentle clink of silver on ceramic, and the unmistakable sound of tray being placed just so on a table beside the bed. Welcome to the aristocratic morning, a time of gentle awakenings, room temperature wash water, and the quiet war between status and sleepiness. You shift under the covers, still half lost in the downy warmth, as your servant murmurs a greeting, something polite and utterly avoidable. They hand you a warm cloth, scented with rose water or bay leaf, to dab your face and hands. Not for hygiene, mind you, that's what baths are for, those rare, chilly, awkward affairs that only happen once or twice a week at best. No, this morning wipe is about polish, appearance, freshening up the illusion of perfect rest. Mainstream historical fact: aristocrats in the 18th century didn't exactly leap out of bed ready to conquer the day. Instead, they rose in layers, physically and socially. There was the first rising when servants entered, then the second when you actually left the bed, and sometimes a third when you finally emerge into society after hours of grooming. Waking up was practically a team sport. Your room smells faintly of beeswax polish and whatever flour water your staff dabbed on the linens yesterday. Outside, a few birds are daring to chirp, and you can hear the gardener clomping across the gravel path, probably cursing the weather under his breath. You sit up slowly, clutching the embroidered coverlet like a half-awake monarch surveying your very small kingdom. And then comes the tea, or, depending on your station and taste, chocolate. Yes, you heard that right. Hot chocolate wasn't just a dessert drink in powdered pouches. It was a breakfast of champions. Rich, spiced, and probably thick enough to stand a spoon in. Chocolate was aristocratic fuel, believed to stimulate the body and sharpen the mind. Also believed to aid digestion. Also believed to fix just about anything that ailed you, except gout. Nothing fixed gout. You sip it slowly, careful not to spill on the ivory bed sheets. The porcelain cup is thin and absurdly delicate. One wrong move, and it'll cost your footman a week's wages. The saucer underneath is equally dainty, painted with little blue flowers you vaguely recognize but couldn't name to save your title. And now begins the first round of decisions. What wig to wear, which waistcoat or gown, whether to lounge in bed a bit longer or shift to your dressing chair, which of course is positioned just right to catch the morning light, in case a guest drops in before noon. And yes, they do that. Uninvited morning visits were a thing. Can you imagine your co-worker knocking on your bedroom door at 9 a.m., with news of the weather and an opinion about your curtains? Quirky tidbit. Some aristocrats paid actors, or at least very enthusiastic staff, to wake them up with music, a little lute strumming, maybe a flute solo. One duchess was rumored to prefer a small string quartet at 6:30 in the morning. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine preference or just a way to assert dominance over everyone else's REM cycles. You finally swing your legs over the side of the bed, placing your feet into those ever-reliable rabbit fur slippers. The chamber is warmer now. Someone stoked the hearth. A robe, quilted satin naturally, is draped across the chair. You slip it on, tie the sash, and shuffle over to the small writing desk by the window. Time to check the letters. Your valet hands you a tray. Folded parchment wax seals, one with a scent that's suspiciously floral. You slice it open with a little ivory-handled knife and scan the contents. News from London. News from Bath. Gossip about someone else's cousin who may or may not be indisposed due to a mysterious fever and a poorly timed romance. You sigh, fold the letter, and look out the window. The estate stretches beyond the garden in careful rows of trees and hedgerows. The morning fog clings low over the hills. You can see a servant in the distance carrying a covered basket. Perhaps fresh rolls from the bakehouse, or maybe a ferret. One can never tell at this hour. You finally stand. Time to move into the dressing portion of your morning. This is not a solo activity. There's a team for that. Someone brushes your hair. Another prepares the wash basin, which has been warming by the hearth. Your garments are already laid out, pressed, stitched, and fussed over. And yes, your underthings alone have more buttons than a modern space shuttle. The clothes go on in layers. Chemise or shirt first, followed by stays or waistcoat, depending on your gender and degree of stubbornness. Then the outer layers, silks, velvets, brocades. Accessories, pins, jewelry, perfume. More perfume, maybe a patch or two on the face. Carefully applied not just for fashion, but to suggest a playful ailment. Because apparently, nothing says elite like a tiny black velvet crescent moon stuck just below your left eye. And don't forget the wig. Powdered, curled, perched just right. Itches like betrayal, but completes the look. You glance at yourself in the mirror. You look exhausted, but you look rich. A knock on the door. Breakfast is ready. You follow the scent of fresh bread, boiled eggs, maybe smoked fish if you're feeling continental. The dining room is set. Other members of the household are arriving. Some in slippers, others in full court-ready ensembles, depending on how seriously they take appearances before 10 a.m. You sit, sip more chocolate, and pretend you're ready to discuss the condition of the stables or the state of the monarchy. But you're still half asleep, thinking longingly of the bed you just left and the strange comfort of being horizontal and undisturbed. Someone mentions an afternoon ride. Someone else suggests music in the drawing room. And you nod politely, wondering if you can sneak in a nap before lunch. Because here's the thing they don't tell you about aristocratic life. It's exhausting being pampered. You leave the breakfast room feeling full, mildly caffeinated, and just a bit resentful that society has declared the morning officially started. The house is awake now, fully awake. Doors creak open. Footmen clatter down the halls with silver trays, and somewhere in the distance, a harpsichord is already being tuned with all the subtlety of a catfight. Your slippers shuffle against polished wooden floors as you retreat to your chambers. Not to sleep? Of course. At least not yet. There's still the sacred rite of the morning lie down to be observed. Yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. A short return to bed after breakfast. Not quite a nap. Not a nap. You stretch across the now-made sheets, gazing at the ceiling where a faded mural of cherubs gazes back at you like judgmental marshmallows. Historically, this wasn't pure indulgence. It was pacing. Aristocrats didn't barrel through their days. They glided. Waking routines were staggered, divided by meals, wardrobe changes, and occasional spontaneous existential crises. Your morning lie down isn't laziness. It's strategy. You have to save energy for a full afternoon of embroidery critique, carriage rides, and not dying of boredom. And besides, the morning light filtering through the lace curtains is soft and syrupy. You're warm, content, and temporarily off duty. Even the birds have gone quieter. You let your eyes drift closed. Quirky tidbit? Some nobles kept trained birds, not just songbirds, but tiny nightingales taught to warble lullabies. A few aristocrats even employed staff whose only job was to keep the birds singing. Imagine being paid to whistle at a cage all day. Historians still argue whether these feathered serenades help with relaxation or just added to the general sense of opulence and absurdity. Eventually, of course, someone knocks. Time doesn't exactly march in this household. It knocks politely. A servant appears with a porcelain dish of sugared almonds and a fresh spritz of lavender water. You sigh. The day must go on. It's mid-morning now, and depending on your gender and schedule, you're either being shuffled into a private salon for embroidery and gossip, or herded toward the study to look important while sipping sherry. You probably already changed outfits once. Yes, once. Outfit number 2. And you're only halfway through your day. You select a robe of russet silk. Something relaxed yet statement-making. You're aiming for, I might be free this afternoon, but only if I'm emotionally moved. Accessories include a lace cravat or delicate fichu, and maybe a small cameo pinned above your heart. Ideally of someone you don't talk to anymore, but still want people to ask about. Now comes the pre-lunch lull. You settle into a chaise longue, possibly in the drawing room, possibly in the garden. Either way, you're horizontal again. It's truly a sport this elegant lounging. You fan yourself absent-mindedly while a companion reads aloud from the latest serialized French novel. Something about a baron, a misunderstanding, and a fainting goat. You smile politely and let your mind wander. You think about lunch. You think about whether it's too soon to nap again. You think about that letter you still haven't replied to, the one from your cousin in Vienna, who seems to be collecting failed engagements like a hobby. Then it hits you. Aristocrats didn't sleep like modern people. Here's the mainstream historical fact. Sleep was biphasic. That means two main stretches of rest, usually broken up by a wakeful hour or two in the middle of the night. People would go to bed around 9 or 10, sleep for a few hours, wake up between midnight and 2 a.m., and then go back to bed until morning. The midnight hour was for reading, praying, quiet conversation, or sneaking across marble floors for reasons we won't fully explore in polite company. But naps were holy. Afternoon naps, called slumbering or reposing, weren't just allowed, they were scheduled, especially for those high up the social ladder, whose job it was to attend long dinners, late balls, and operas that somehow didn't end until Tuesday. You could find a small couch in the music room, or steal a few minutes behind a screen in the conservatory. A soft sigh, a tilted head, a strategically placed fan to block the sunlight. Voila, you're resting your eyes, not snoozing. Your body starts to mirror the habits of your class. The very structure of your day bends towards sleep, not as a necessity, but as a curated experience. You sleep on feather mattresses, under quilts stitched by nuns or imported from India. You wear linen nightshirts embroidered with your initials and maybe a poorly drawn line. The mattress itself rests on ropes that must be tightened regularly, hence the phrase sleep tight. Literally. Someone has to crank the bed before you can use it. You sip water from a goblet, glance at the clock, and decide it's time to stroll. This is an exercise. No one here is sweating intentionally. It's a promenade, slow, stately, with parasols and the occasional exchange of veiled insults disguised as compliments. If you're lucky, someone feigns from a tight corset, and you all get to hover dramatically like concerned bees. Afterward, it's finally lunch, which is light. Think clear broth, cold game pie, maybe something green if the cook is feeling dangerous. But lunch isn't about food. It's about resetting the schedule. Eating gives you a reason to sit down, which gives you a reason to stand up, which gives you a reason to retreat again. And oh look, the drawing room has been refreshed. The chairs have been rearranged. The harp has been tuned poorly. You sigh, steal a candied violet, and drift to the chaise. Once more, you find yourself horizontal. Once more, the edges of your vision blur. Once more, you are reminded that being rich is really, really tiring. You don't fall asleep, not really, but you drift. You hover. You dream lightly of gardens and starlight and overcooked asparagus. Someone coughs. Someone laughs. The world keeps turning gently, slowly, like a music box that's missing just one gear. And you prepare for the next phase of aristocratic exhaustion. You wake slowly, like a velvet curtain being drawn back inch by inch. The room has shifted again. Afternoon light now stretches long and golden across the floor, catching on the crystal inkwell at the writing desk. You hear distant conversation, soft footfalls, a dog barking once then twice. The house isn't loud. It never is. But there's a hum to it now, the sound of 100 quiet things happening at once. You sit up on the chaise, mildly disoriented. The embroidered pillow has left a pattern across your cheek, resembling a heraldic goose. No one mentions it. Or if they do it behind a fan. It's officially the hours of polite obligation. This means you're expected to be visible, but not interesting. The aristocracy has mastered this paradox. Being present while doing almost nothing. You float from salon to salon, maybe joining a card game you don't care about, or pretending to understand a poem recited in overly emotional Italian. You nod, smile, say something vague about the chiaroscuro of his metaphors, and move on. This, too, is tiring. Not physically, but existentially. Eventually, you slip away, perhaps to the music room, perhaps to the garden again, but most likely to your private chamber. Yes, again, because now, dear listener, it's time for your pre-dinner nap. That's right, a third official horizontal session. This one's short, just enough to stave off the droopiness caused by too much rich air and too many conversations about impressionist tendencies in rug weaving. You draw the curtains, loosen the sash of your robe, and collapse into bed like a gently felled tree. And here's your mainstream historical fact. Most 18th century aristocrats didn't sleep all in one go because their lives weren't structured around sunrise to sunset productivity. Artificial lighting, candles, oil lamps, gave them freedom to shape time as they pleased. Dinner might not start until 8 p.m., and after that, there were hours of conversation, music, and drama to come. So the day bent around the night. Rest came in dozes. Quirky tidbit, some nobles hired professional wakers. Servants tasked with rousing their employers at the precise moment a nap should end. These wakers used soft gongs, perfumed fans, or even well-trained lapdogs with cold noses. One duchess reportedly preferred to be awakened by the scent of warm bread, delivered to her pillow in a small linen pouch. That's not luxury, that's wizardry. Historians still argue whether these segmented sleep patterns were healthier than modern consolidated sleep. Some claim biphasic rest aligned better with natural circadian rhythms. Others point out the aristocracy wasn't exactly a model of health. They just made exhaustion look fashionable. You wake again, this time to the muted chime of the hallway clock. It's early evening. A servant enters without knocking, just a gentle knock and pause motion, the illusion of privacy. She carries your dinner attire on a padded hanger draped with lace. You sigh, deeply. Changing for dinner is a full event. You must bathe, again, either in a porcelain basin or, if you're lucky, in a full wooden tub warmed with buckets of heated water lugged up 5 flights of stairs. You towel off with linen that smells faintly of rosewater and smoke. Then the dressing begins. For you, perhaps it's a pale teal waistcoat with silver buttons shaped like leaves, or a silk gown in saffron with sleeve ruffles that could double as table settings. Stockings are pulled, stays are tightened, hair is styled, powder is applied, jewelry is selected, then rejected, then reconsidered. You look like money. You smell like lavender and mild regret. You're ready. Barely. Now comes the descent. The grand walk down the staircase into the candlelit world of dinner. The air smells of roast pheasant, cardamom, and whatever cologne your cousin insists is subtle. Your seat is already assigned. You're flanked by someone interesting on the left and someone insufferable on the right. The aristocracy believes in balance. Dinner unfolds slowly, like an overly polite opera. There are too many courses, too many forks, and too many stories about people whose titles are longer than their reputations. You chew, you nod, you sip, you lie convincingly about enjoying the aspic. Then Apollo of naps strikes again, because after the third course, the room begins to droop, heads nod, conversation slows. Someone stifles a yawn behind a lace glove. You fantasize briefly about crawling under the table and using a fallen napkin as a pillow. But no, you endure, you persevere. You accept another glass of wine and pretend to be fascinated by a lengthy anecdote involving a bishop, a mule, and a scandal that never quite pays off. Eventually, dessert arrives. Preserved pears, sugared chestnuts, marzipan molded into vaguely insulting likenesses of local officials. You nibble politely, then push your plate aside. The night isn't over. You adjourn to the drawing room for music and what can only be described as sanctioned eavesdropping. The pianist is a cousin. The soprano is visiting from Paris. The drama is lukewarm but highly performative. You yawn discreetly, blaming the air. But here's the truth. Your body is begging for more rest, not deep sleep yet, but that floaty, soft-edged drowsiness that aristocrats learn to wear like perfume. You excuse yourself, not because you're rude, but because you're refined. You return to your chamber. The fire is low. Your slippers wait like loyal foot friends. The candlelight dances across the silver mirror. You begin to undress, fingers clumsy with fatigue. You lie down, and you prepare for the next phase. True sleep. Not just a nap, not just a pre-dinner doze, but real, long, luxurious unconsciousness, broken, of course, by the obligatory midnight wander. But you don't know that yet. All you know is this bed is warm. The linen is soft. The world outside your window has gone quiet. And for the moment, the only thing expected of you is to rest. The candle beside your bed gutters once, then gives in, its tiny flame folding into itself with a sigh. You're not asleep yet, not fully. Your limbs are heavy. Yes, your eyes are half closed, but your mind floats somewhere in the velvet space between awareness and dream. This is, oddly enough, a socially acceptable phase of the night. You're not expected to stay asleep for long, because, you see, in the 18th century, midnight was just the intermission. At some point, maybe 1 hour, maybe 3, you stir, not because of a noise or a nightmare, but because it's simply what your body is used to. It's normal, common, almost fashionable. This period is called the first sleep. And now, you're in what historians have labeled the watch. You sit up. The room is dark, save for moonlight pouring into the window, brushing the floor like a layer of frost. You throw off the blanket and reach for your slippers, which have migrated slightly out of reach. Treacherous little things. The fire has gone cold. The embers, though, still glow faintly like the memory of heat. You pad toward the hearth and toss in a small log. It crackles faintly. This is a time for reflection, for prayer, for dreams and diary entries. Or, if you're an 18th century aristocrat with more ambition than boundaries, for correspondence. Yes, you might wander over to the small escritoire in the corner, light a candle from the fire, and begin writing. Maybe it's a letter to your cousin in Vienna, full of poetic longing and scandalous subtext. Maybe it's a list of who snubbed whom at dinner. Or maybe it's just doodles in the margins and a paragraph about that dream you keep having with the tiger in the ballroom. Mainstream historical fact. In the pre-industrial world, segmented sleep was common. People would wake for 1 to 2 hours during the night, reading, praying, writing, even visiting neighbors, before going back to bed for a second sleep. This wasn't considered insomnia. It was considered normal. You might even snack. That's right. Midnight snacks were a thing. A biscuit, a bit of cheese, a sip of warm wine, or herbal tonic. Something gentle for the stomach and the soul. You chew slowly, listening to the wind tap at the windows like a butler with secrets. Quirky tidbit: one noblewoman famously insisted on a ritual midnight ginger bath during this hour, basically soaking her feet in warm, spice water while reciting translated Egyptian proverbs. She swore to improve her dreams. It probably just made the servants want to mutiny. Historians still argue whether this segmented sleep habit was biologically better for humans. Some say our circadian rhythms naturally prefer 2 blocks of rest, with an hour or 2 of wakefulness in the middle. Others think this pattern was simply a cultural adaptation to candlelight, uneven heating, and too many late-night sausages. You rise from your writing desk, stretch luxuriously, and glance out the window. The estate sleeps. You see no one, though you suspect the staff are also up, maybe tending fires, maybe whispering stories in the servants' quarters, maybe sneaking slices of cake from the kitchen. You could go for a walk. Some did, with a cloak thrown over your night dress or robe. You'd wander the corridors like a polite ghost. Maybe descend to the library, open a random volume on celestial navigation, and pretend you understand it. Or not. Maybe just flip to the part with the dragons on the margin and trace their spines with your fingertip. You're not alone in this habit. Many of your peers do the same. Some even plan their best thoughts for this hour, as though their minds only become interesting between 1 and 3 a.m. Eventually, the second sleep calls. It doesn't shout. It whispers. You return to bed. The sheets are cool again, which is both annoying and somehow comforting. You wrap yourself in the covers like a noble burrito and close your eyes. This sleep is different, deeper, weirder. Your dreams stretch longer now, richer. You might dream of floating above the manor in a hot air balloon made entirely of silk gloves, or dining with Queen Charlotte while she insists raccoons are the true heirs to the throne, or wandering through a maze where every turn plays a violin note. You don't question these dreams. You just follow them like ribbons through fog. The sky outside lightens by degrees. A faint pink hue on the horizon tells you that dawn is flirting with the idea of showing up. The first servant rises. You hear the faintest creak of a floorboard down the hall. The world is beginning again. But you, lucky soul, are not expected to move yet. You remain curled in bed, suspended in the space between royal demands and real wakefulness. This is the final grace of night, the post-dream days, the warm weight of sleep, still clinging to your limbs like velvet moss. In a few hours, you'll have to start the whole elegant cycle again. But for now, let yourself drift once more into that second, softer sleep. Let the room go quiet. Let your thoughts blur. Let your breath slow. Because whether you're a duke, a countess, or just someone with very fancy pillows, this tender hour of deep unconsciousness is your birthright. The day begins in that hazy half-light, where the sun is yet to fully commit, but the birds have made their decision. You stir slowly beneath a canopy of embroidered fabric, the edges of your dreams still clinging like cobwebs. Somewhere outside your window, a gardener coughs, a distant horse snorts, and the world reboots itself with an aristocratic yawn. If you're lucky or just high up the social ladder, you're not required to leap from bed. No one expects that. You, after all, are not some boot-polishing clerk or flour-dusted baker. You're a creature of leisure and legacy. You stretch luxuriously, the way a cat might if the cat were wearing a nightcap made of imported lace. A gentle knock. Your maid enters, eyes politely lowered, bearing the early tray. A silver pitcher of warm water, a bowl, a linen cloth, and, if the day is especially generous, a delicate saucer with thin biscuit or sliver of apple. You sit up with a soft groan. Your nightwear is rumpled. Your hair, despite last night's careful braiding, has somehow rebelled in all directions. You look like a portrait halfway through the artist's commission. Morning rituals now begin. Mainstream historical fact. 18th-century aristocrats didn't exactly spring into action. The morning routine was an event. There was a washing of the face and hands, with water heated over coals, the teeth scraping, often done with linen cloths and vinegar, and, if you were especially devoted, the gentle application of rose water or pomade. Showers were a laughable concept. Baths were rare and political. Cleanliness was a complex performance. You sit at your vanity, polished walnut with silver-rimmed mirror, and begin the slow transformation. Your valet or maid assists with undergarments, corsetry, and layers upon layers of fabric. Everything from the stockings to the lace cuffs has an order, a meaning, a season. Summer, lighter silks and muslin. Winter, heavier brocades and wool-lined waistcoats. Quirky tidbit. One eccentric duchess was so particular about her dressing order that she made her maid rehearse it with dolls. The dolls wore mini versions of her gowns, and woe to anyone who mixed up the slippers with the petticoat. You glance out the window between garments. The world is fully awake now. Servants hauling logs, footmen brushing horses, cooks shouting in the distance about bread that refuses to rise. The hum of estate life builds beneath you like music swelling toward a chorus. Historians still argue whether this kind of aristocratic delay, this drawn-out waking routine, was indulgence or strategy. Some claim it was a form of power display. If you didn't have to rush, clearly you were important. Others think it was just laziness wrapped in embroidery. Eventually, you make your way down to the breakfast room. The scent hits you before you arrive. Roasted chicory, honey-glazed rolls, maybe even a hint of cured meat or softly boiled eggs. But food is never eaten immediately. That would be uncivilized. No. First there are greetings. You nod to the Marquis, who always smells faintly of lavender and smugness. You smile thinly at the Baroness who once insulted your garden without blinking. You comment on the weather, the dew on the lawn, the suspicious behavior of the peacock. And then, finally, your plate. You sit in a carved chair, linen napkin across your lap, and sip a delicate infusion of lemon and thyme. You tear a croissant, imported, or at least pretended to be, and chew slowly while pretending not to listen to the ongoing debate about whether last night's fireworks were too gauche. This is your world. Powdered wigs, subtle insults, fragrant teas, and silver forks that cost more than most horses. You glance at the clock. It's not even noon, but the pacing matters. Because aristocratic life is not about efficiency. It's about experience. Mornings are for establishing the mood, and in your case, that mood is elegantly groggy with a touch of deliberate mystery. If there's business to attend to, letters to sign, estate books to review, legal matters involving questionable fencing rights, it happens after breakfast but before luncheon, that sacred slot between indulgence and indigestion. You make your way to your private study, where ink bottles gleam like captured shadows, and a quill has been sharpened by someone whose entire job is knowing how to sharpen quills. You write a note to your cousin in Paris, something vaguely flirty and alarmingly poetic. You scan the household accounts, briefly, then pretend to be distracted by a bird on the windowsill. It's a useful excuse to avoid any mention of the goat feed overages from last month. You sketch something in the margins of your calendar. A flower, a fox, a very bored angel with a monocle. And then the morning ends. Not with a bang, not with productivity, but with a soft click of the clock, a sip of elderflower cordial, and the comforting realization that no one expects you to do anything too quickly. So you rise, you stretch again, and you glide down the hall toward the drawing room, where someone is tuning a harp, and someone else is debating whether afternoon breezes are better in Florence or Vienna. You offer an opinion. Of course, you say. Florence has a charm, but Vienna has a drama. Everyone nods like that was very profound, and you smile because it's barely noon and you've already had 4 compliments and 2 muffins. Not a bad start. You settle into the afternoon with the sort of confidence only found in someone who knows they won't be doing anything particularly strenuous for at least the next 6 hours. The sunlight has shifted slightly, pouring into the tall windows like golden syrup across polished wood floors. A maid tiptoes past with a tray of sugared almonds. Somewhere in the courtyard, someone is losing at a game of lawn bowls, judging by the frustrated clink of wood and a mumbled curse that's just shy of impolite. Now comes the most sacred window of time in the daily routine, the midday nap, known politely as resting one's eyes, taking a breath, or, if you're being particularly French about it, a bit of après-midi repose. You, of course, embrace it fully. The chaise lounge in your reading room is your destination, cushioned in tufted velvet. It welcomes your weight like an old friend with gossip. You stretch out, fingers interlaced behind your head, and let your eyelids lower without ever admitting you're falling asleep. Mainstream historical fact. Afternoon naps were widely practiced by 18th-century aristocrats. Far from being seen as lazy, they were part of a well-balanced day, especially among the elite who often dined late and stayed up even later. Rooms were designed with restful corners, curtained alcoves, fainting couches, and faintly perfumed cushions. Even men of power were known to disappear for a post-lunch doze with zero shame. You shift once, twice, then let your thoughts drift. Somewhere between consciousness and dreamscape, you imagine a swan gliding across a still lake while reciting poetry in Latin. That's probably the cheese from lunch talking. A whisper of footsteps. Your valet enters quietly. He knows better than to knock, and places a cooling cloth across your forehead, infused with lavender and mint. You murmur something unintelligible in response. It could be thank you or let the ducks vote. Hard to say. Quirky tidbit. One famously eccentric count in Vienna was known to nap upright in a wooden armchair, arms crossed over his chest like a sarcophagus, because he believed it aligned his soul with Venus. His household staff referred to it as his lordship's vertical death. You mercifully are horizontal and blissfully unaware time. Outside, the wind flutters through hedges. Someone hums a lullaby nearby. Maybe a maid, maybe a bored noble with a fondness for a tuneless melody. Either way, you let the rhythm of the house cradle you. Historians still argue whether these naps were truly about sleep or about escape. Some suggest aristocrats used this hour to avoid uncomfortable visitors, boring conversation, or awkward political arguments. Others believe it was a mark of social distinction. After all, only the idle rich could afford the luxury of mid-afternoon oblivion. You drift, you float, and then eventually you wake. Not fully, not all at once. Just enough to blink, yawn without judgment, and sit upright with a grace that can only be faked once you practice in front of a mirror. The sun is lower now. The nap has done its job. You're refreshed, or at least no longer existentially wilted. You pat your hair back into place, retie your sash, and make your way down the corridor where the scent of fresh tea hangs in the air like a promise. It's time for the light meal, which is code for just enough to keep you from fainting before dinner. Delicate pastries, chilled fruit, and little finger sandwiches arranged in ornate spirals that someone probably spent hours crafting. You pretend not to notice the artistry as you devour 3 in a row. A small gathering is formed in the garden. Silk gowns rustle, powdered wigs bob, and fans flutter like infused butterflies. There's laughter, dry, musical, often insincere. A gentleman is reading aloud from a volume of verse, which most people ignore until he dramatically raises his voice at a passionate stanza. You comment on the rhymes. Someone asks your opinion on the latest engraving of Marie Antoinette. You say she looks like she smells faintly of lilacs and powdered sugar. The group nods approvingly because none of them have actually seen the engraving. Someone suggests a walk. You link arms with an acquaintance, neither friend nor foe, just someone you once played charades with during a thunderstorm. The two of you wander slowly beneath the arbor, pausing to admire a suspiciously well-behaved rose bush. You chat about unimportant things, whether bees prefer violets or clover, whether the estate next door is secretly growing illegal spices, whether your cousin is ever going to get married or just continue collecting antique spoons. The conversation is as light as the breeze, and that's the point. No decisions, no drama, just a gentle suspension of reality between lunch and dinner. Eventually, someone suggests returning indoors. A card game is forming in the parlor. Stakes are low, drama is high, and someone has already accused someone else of hiding a spare queen up their sleeve. You beg off. Your eyes are still heavy with the residue of rest, and the thought of losing silver coins over bad luck feels exhausting. You'd rather sit by the window, perhaps with a book you've already read twice, pretending to be engrossed while watching the garden shift into early evening. A footman offers a tray with small glasses of sherry. You accept one, take a sip, and let the warm coat your chest like a polite fire. You're not asleep, not quite, but the nap has left you suspended in that perfect space, rested but not sluggish, alert but not energetic, dreamlike without dreaming. And as the house begins to stir again, preparations for dinner, voices rising in the hallway, distant laughter from the servant's wing. You remain perfectly still, not out of duty, not out of boredom, but because this right here is the moment the entire day was designed to protect. The quiet pause between the rushes of expectation, and you, lucky, pampered you, are right in the center of it. Dinner approaches slowly, like a well-dressed guest who insists on arriving fashionably late. You can feel it approach in the way the staff begins to scurry, Polished shoes tapping softly against marble, whispered updates about seating arrangements, last-minute debates over which porcelain pattern best matches a trout. Yes, tonight there will be trout. It was discussed at length this morning by 2 kitchen maids and an ambitious underchef who dreams of Paris. You, for your part, begin your transformation. Aristocratic evening attire is not for the faint of heart or weak of corset. For men, it means high collars, tight breeches, and enough powdered fabric to make a moth weep. For women, it's layers upon layers. Lace, silk, whalebone support structures, and accessories so delicate they must be applied with tweezers and held in place by sheer aristocratic determination. You're helped into your evening ensemble by a valet or maid, depending on your gender and level of drama, and you watch yourself in the mirror, becoming someone who is expected to dazzle, or at least avoid yawning during the soup course. Mainstream historical fact. Formal dinners among the 18th-century aristocracy weren't just meals. They were theatrical productions. Guests were seated according to rank. Dishes arrived in choreographed waves, and entire courses could consist of over 20 separate platters. You were expected to know not just where to sit, but when to nod, what a compliment, and how to avoid scandalous conversation. Unless, of course, it was delightfully scandalous. At last, the bell chimes. It's not a dinner bell exactly, more like a gently suggestive clang that says, now would be a good time to appear clever and dressed. You enter the dining room. It is a glowing tableau, candlelight flickering off gold-rimmed plates. Crystal goblets line like soldiers awaiting their fill, centerpieces of fruit so shiny they look painted. The long table gleams with potential. Murmurs rise. Eyebrows lift. Someone in a teal waistcoat makes a dramatic bow, which earns a smattering of applause and one unimpressed glance from a duchess who's seen better entrances. You take your seat. First course. Something involving aspic, which is a word no one enjoys saying aloud. You eat it with a sort of polite restraint that says, this is lovely, even though it's alarmingly gelatinous and faintly salty. Conversation is light. Weather, fashion, the recent scandal involving someone's cousin, and a very stubborn mule. You sip your wine slowly, pacing yourself. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Across the table, Apollo, yes, still using his alias, still pretending not to be divine, lifts a fork with theatrical delicacy. Isn't this delightful? He asks, gesturing toward a quail that has been stuffed with something mysterious and possibly poetic. I can taste at least 3 different regrets. Quirky tidbit. It's rumored that one Austrian baroness refused to attend dinners unless the menu included moon-shaped carrots. She insisted they help her sleep better. The kitchen staff carved them nightly, and no one dare question her logic or her snoring. You make a quiet toast with your neighbor, a mild-mannered viscount who collects fossils and speaks exclusively in polite anecdotes about weather patterns. You like him. He doesn't talk too much. More courses arrive. Spiced fish, something in pastry, a suspiciously shiny custard. Someone begins recounting a dream involving Marie Antoinette and a peacock. Everyone listens politely, though several eyes glaze over around the second peacock detail. Historians still argue whether these dinners were truly about food or about formality. Some claim the elaborate meals were distractions from deeper political tensions. Others believe they served as stages where alliances were made, reputations sealed, and fortunes won or lost over roast pheasant. Eventually, dessert arrives, a towering confection of spun sugar and candied violets that threatens to collapse under its own ambition. You take a bite. It's absurdly sweet but beautiful, like most things here. And then, finally, as coffee is poured and conversation softens to a simmer, the first yawns are stifled behind lace fans and polite coughs. But of course, the evening isn't over. No, now comes the salon. The transition is subtle. Chairs shift. Musicians appear as if conjured by candlelight. Someone begins playing a delicate minuet on a harpsichord, and guests drift toward a drawing room, fingers trailing across wallpaper, pausing to compliment paintings they've ignored all week. You follow, your step slightly slower now, your body beginning to understand that sleep is not far away, but not quite yet. In the salon, velvet chairs form conversational islands. A circle gathers around a dramatic reading of a recent tragedy. A poet recites something vaguely romantic and deeply confusing. Apollo lounges near the fireplace, legs crossed, telling a story about a thunderstorm in Corsica that may or may not involve real lightning. You settle beside a tall window, watching moths batter themselves against the glass in frantic patterns. Someone offers you a cordial. You accept. It tastes like cherries and long silences. Another conversation springs up, this one about the stars. You contribute a theory about how constellations are just gods who got bored of walking. It's met with nods and one enthusiastic, "Indeed." The harpsichord player switches to a lullaby. It isn't announced. It just happens. The notes are soft, slow, aching in the best way. They linger in a room like candle smoke, curling around conversation, urging eyelids downward. A few guests begin to drift toward their rooms, claiming fatigue. You understand. You feel it too. And so, slowly you rise. One final curtsy, one last bowed head, a murmured good night. Here, sleep well there. Apollo watches you go, one eyebrow raised like he knows you'll dream of something strange tonight. You exit into the hallway, quieter now, the walls humming with warmth and soft echoes. Your room waits, but not yet. You pause at the stairs. Look back once. The music still plays. The candles still flicker. But sleep is calling. And for once, even a god seemed to agree. The day is done. Your slippers make no sound against a long rug that runs down the corridor like a silk tongue, leading you back to your room. The hallway flickers in candlelight, shadows soft and full of sighs. You pass other guests on their own sleepy pilgrimages, half-laced corsets, crumpled cravats, cheeks pink with wine, with the shame of mediocre storytelling. Everyone's pretending not to be tired. Everyone is. You reach your chamber, open the door, and step into the soft, warm hush of your sanctuary. Let's take stock. There's your bed, canopied, brocaded, large enough to host a family reunion. Your slippers find their place beneath a stool. Your dressing gown waits draped across the chaise, long like it has opinions about punctuality. A small fire glows in the hearth, more for comfort than necessity. Its crackles time like exclamation points in an otherwise whispering room. Mainstream historical fact. Aristocrats in the 18th century didn't just fall into bed. They eased into sleep like it was an art form. Nighttime involved an entire process, removing layers of finery, cleansing the skin with rose water or milk, donning soft linen shifts or embroidered nightcaps, sometimes even saying a few memorized lines from Cicero just to keep the brain classy before it powered down. You begin the ritual. Shoes first, then unpinning your hair or removing your wig, depending on what sort of decorative nightmare you chose for the evening. You wash your face in a porcelain basin, pat yourself dry with linen cloths that smell faintly of lavender and maybe someone's broken dreams. And then the best part, you climb into bed. The mattress is firm in the middle, soft at the edges, and supported by ropes tightened just this morning by a scowling maid with forearms like tree trunks. The phrase "sleep tight" suddenly makes perfect sense. You sink in. The sheets are cool, the coverlet heavy. The canopy above you frames the ceiling in velvet shadows. Somewhere in the hallway, a door closes with the kind of finality that says, "We made it." Fringe tidbit. Some noble women refuse to sleep lying flat, believing it made them look corpse-like or invited bad dreams. Instead, they prop themselves upright on mountains of pillows like sleepy pharaohs, drifting into dreams with one eye on the ceiling. You're not quite that dramatic, but you do fluff a pillow just so. You pull the covers up under your chin. You stretch one foot into the cold edge of the bed, just to feel alive. Outside the window, the world has gone dim and hushed. The stars blink lazily. A soft breeze fingers the curtains. And now the mind drifts. You think about the salon earlier, the music, the laughter, the story Apollo told, with its golden lightning and vaguely familiar metaphors. Was it even about Corsica? Was it even about weather? You let it go. Historians still argue whether the aristocratic evening routine contributed to better sleep or simply prolonged the act of not sleeping. Some believe the rituals helped quiet overstimulated minds. Others argue it was just another form of performative opulence, like peacock feather fans or gold-plated chamber pots. You're inclined to think it worked. You're yawning now. Your limbs feel heavy in that good way, like someone wrapped you in velvet and told the universe to hush. Then, because of course it happens, a scratching sound. It's faint, just once, near the door. You ignore it. You're 94% asleep. Then it comes again. This time a voice whispers, "Are you decent?" It's Apollo. You groan. Define decent. "I brought something," he replies. You sigh dramatically, sit up, and throw on your robe. When you open the door, he's standing there in soft boots and a borrowed cloak, hair messy from the wind, and holding, of all things, a carved wooden box. "I can't sleep," he says. You raise an eyebrow. "So you thought you'd come ruin my attempt?" "No," he says earnestly. "I thought we could try this." He opens the box. Inside, a collection of tiny glass bottles, each one filled with something fragrant: dried herbs, oils, crushed flower petals. They shimmer faintly in the firelight. "It's a sleep blend," he explains. "They use it in Delphi. Or maybe it was Crete. I wasn't exactly reading the labels." You let him in. Together, you place the bottles near the hearth. He sprinkles something into the fire. It smells like sandalwood, mint, and something floral but stubbornly unnamed. The smoke curls gently into the room, softening the shadows, thickening the quiet. You both sit on the edge of your bed. "You don't sleep?" you ask. He shrugs. Sometimes I just wait for morning." There's a pause. Then, "You ever miss being, worshipped?" He laughs. "Only on my birthday." You smile, and he leans back against your bedpost, eyes on the fire. "You think you'll ever go back?" you ask. He doesn't answer. Instead, he holds up one of the little bottles. This one's supposed to chase away bad dreams, he says. What's in it? Definitely not mercury, he says, far too quickly. You both laugh. It's quiet again. Then, without ceremony, he says, you're the only person who doesn't treat me like a myth. You think about that, about what it means to be seen, not as a symbol, not as a cautionary tale, but as a person who can't sleep and collects smelly herbs and misses Olympus only when the stars look too familiar. You don't reply, you just lie back. Apollo stays a while longer, sitting by the fire, watching the flames. Eventually, he stands, pulls your blanket up to your shoulder, and slips out without another word. You fall asleep to the scent of burnt thyme and ancient starlight. You wake slowly, not to sunlight, but to the sound of rain pattering against the window panes like someone drumming soft fingers on parchment. The fire's gone to embers. The room is dim, gentle, and cool enough to make you burrow deeper into the covers for just a few extra moments. The curtains are still drawn, but the gray light seeping through them makes the silk glow faintly. You lie there for a moment, warm, still, and half lost in the tail end of a dream that probably involved powdered wigs and a robe duck in formal attire. Eventually, you sit up. The robe slips from your shoulder, and you shiver. The hearth needs feeding, and your slippers are not where you left them. Of course. This is your life now. You shuffle across the room, relight the fire with the practiced irritation of someone who would very much prefer a servant with a flint and a good attitude. But the servants haven't arrived yet. It's early, too early, according to every bone in your body. Still, you light the fire. You put the kettle near the flame. You stretch. Mainstream historical fact. In the 18th century, aristocrats didn't always sleep straight through the night. Segmented sleep was a common pattern. Two distinct sleep phases separated by a quiet, wakeful hour called a watch. During this period, people prayed, read, wrote in journals, or sometimes, wandered halls barefoot and contemplated their sins. It wasn't considered insomnia. It was just sleep, aristocrat edition. You're clearly in your watch now. And what are you doing with it? You pad over to your writing desk, light a candle, and stare at a blank sheet of creamy paper. You dip your quill. Write what? A note? A journal entry? A passive-aggressive haiku about Apollo stealing your blanket? Fringe tidbit. Some noble households kept what were called dream books, diaries solely for recording dreams, believed to offer divine or emotional insights. They were often bound in soft leather and hidden away, like secrets dressed in calligraphy. You consider starting one. Instead, you write down what you remember from last night, the way the smoke curled, the scent of sandalwood, the way Apollo pulled your blanket up, thinking you were already asleep. You don't write his name. You just call him the guest. It feels right. The candle flickers. You pause. Then the door creaks open, and a maid appears with a small tray. Tea, toast, a tiny jar of apricot preserve, and an expression that says she's been up for hours and thinks you're spoiled for sleeping until nearly 6. You nod your thanks. She leaves silently, like a ghost who also happens to iron cravats. You eat a little, sip the tea. It's strong and floral and barely takes the edge off your lingering dream haze. The rain continues. Eventually, you change out of your sleepwear, slowly, stiffly, like your limbs have turned to soft bread dough overnight. You dress in a morning robe lined with teal silk and wrap your hair with a ribbon that may or may not match. It doesn't matter. No one's judging, except maybe your reflection. By the time you leave your room, the house is stirring. You pass open doors with half-dressed noblemen yawning dramatically while servants brush their hair. You catch snippets of conversation. Someone's horse got loose. Someone else can't find their socks. Someone's still recovering from the shock of last night's all-a solo. You descend to the breakfast salon. Apollo's already there, of course. He's somehow clean, pressed, and bathed in that slightly smug glow that suggests he either doesn't need to sleep or has invented a way to store rest in his dimples. "Good morning," he says, holding out a slice of bread with butter and honey like it's an offering to the gods, or at least to your blood sugar. You take it. You eat it. It helps. The two of you sit side by side as other guests wander in, a procession of sleepy opulence. Someone brings up politics. Someone else insists on talking about their poetry. It's too early for both. But the aristocracy doesn't really do boundaries, does it? Apollo listens, smiles, doesn't add much. He's still here, but you can feel him drifting again, the way he does when the weather shifts or the stars poke at his memory. "Bad dreams?" you ask softly. He nods. "Same one." He nods again. You don't ask for details. You don't need them. You've heard enough hints about temples burning, about thunder cracking bones, about suns with too much light in their eyes. Historians still argue whether dreams in this era were believed to be divine messages or just reflections of one's humors and digestion. Some physicians prescribe sleeping with specific herbs under your pillow to encourage good visions. Others just suggested eating less cheese. You and Apollo, you just sit there and share toast. Later, a servant announces that the weather's easing. The rain's let up. The garden paths are only slightly muddy, just enough to make noble women squeal when they lose a shoe. You and Apollo slip outside. The garden glistens. Leaves shine. Flowers tilt like they've been listening all night and are now gossiping about it. You walk slowly, side by side, saying nothing important, just letting your breath match the pace of the earth settling after rain. He stops near a stone bench and looks up. "The sky's clearing," he murmurs. "You'll be bored again soon." You reply, "Maybe." "Thinking of leaving?" He shrugs. "Thinking of staying." You glance at him. "Why?" He doesn't answer. He just keeps walking. And you follow, because you don't really want to know. Not yet. Let the dream speak for now. Let the stars take their time. You spend the rest of the morning watching the garden dry. Not actively, of course. That would be weird, even for you. But in the way one watches time pass when there's nowhere urgent to be, and the breeze is soft, and the air still carries that just rained-on scent, earthy, green, and somehow ancient. Apollo leans against the carved balustrade, plucking petals from a hydrangea with a bored grace that's either deeply poetic or deeply annoying. Probably both. Behind you, the estate hums to life. Servants clatter with polished platters. Hooves echo in the distant stables. Somewhere, a harpsichord is being tuned with the enthusiasm of a cat being bathed. You yawn, not because you're tired, though let's be honest, aristocratic leisure is exhausting, but because the day feels stretched thin, like the hours are unsure where to settle. Eventually, a footman finds you and announces in a voice that's clearly been rehearsed in a mirror, the Countess invites you to her afternoon repose. Mainstream historical fact. In the 18th century, it was fashionable for the elite to host what were called afternoon rests or quiet gatherings, essentially fancy nap clubs. Guests lounge in private chambers or salons, drinking calming infusions, chatting softly, or dozing on embroidered settees. It was all very delicate and dreamy and slightly absurd. So, of course, you go. The Countess's repose room is a pastel fever dream. Lavender drapes, blush cushions, and a faint scent of chamomile mixed with rose water. There are precisely 8 guests reclining on chaise longues, all pretending they aren't falling asleep. One woman is fully snoring into a doily. Apollo stands near the window, hands folded behind his back, gazing out like he's expecting a flaming chariot to appear over the treetops. You claim a cushion and try not to sink too quickly into the plush abyss. The Countess offers everyone a choice of teas, lemon balm, valerian root, or something my aunt smuggled from the East and won't explain. You pick the aunt's blend, because when aristocracy is involved, mystery is usually the most entertaining option. It tastes like lavender and secrets. And within minutes, your limbs feel heavy and delightful. Across the room, Apollo finally sits, not next to you, but near enough that you can see his eyes close for just a second longer than a blink. You wonder if gods can nap. Fringe tidbit. While sleep was essential to mortals, myth often painted gods as immune or indulgent in their relationship with rest. Some ancient poets claimed that deities like Apollo never needed to sleep, but often chose to, simply to dream of mortals or to escape the noise of Olympus. Sleep wasn't a weakness. It was a choice, a kind of divine luxury. You sip your tea again. A woman in teal begins softly reciting a lullaby from her childhood. It's lilting and slow, and you're only half sure it's in a real language. A man in a velvet coat hums along without shame. Somewhere near the doorway, someone's dog sighs deeply and rolls over onto a pile of silk slippers. Time blurs. You drift. The soft voices melt into the clink of a spoon against porcelain. The lights shift behind the curtains. You think Apollo's humming, barely audible, something familiar, but it could also be your pulse, your breath, or the memory of a lullaby you forgot years ago. You don't fall asleep, exactly, but you do forget how long you've been still. When the Countess announces gently that the hour of repose is concluded, you feel as though you've woken from something deeper than sleep, like your bones took a breath. Outside, the sky is late afternoon gold. Bees buzz through climbing jasmine. The world smells sweeter now, or maybe you're just more awake to it. You and Apollo step outside together, blinking against the light. That tea was illegal, you say. Probably, he replies. Still worth it. Definitely. The two of you walk back toward the orchard. There's supposed to be a demonstration soon. Some guest's cousin's invention, involving ropes and pulleys and a theory that sleep posture can affect personality. You decide to skip it. You sit beneath a fig tree. Apollo leans his head back and closes his eyes. He doesn't sleep, but he doesn't talk either. You watch the breeze shift the grass. A servant carries a tray of candied nuts past you without breaking stride. A bird lands briefly on Apollo's shoulder, realizes its mistake, and departs with the kind of ruffled urgency only birds can achieve. I don't hate it here, he says eventually. That's high praise. He chuckles. It's peaceful. It doesn't last, but it's good while it does. You nod. Then Because it's your turn to ask the questions no one wants to answer. You say, "Do you dream?" Apollo doesn't open his eyes. "Yes." "About what?" He hesitates. "About who I was, who I tried to be, and sometimes who I still might become." You let that sit between you, as ripe and fragile as the figs overhead. Historians still argue whether aristocratic repose was about actual rest or just another form of performance. Was it about healing, or showing off one's ability to exist gracefully in leisure? Some claim it was a secret rebellion against the pace of court life. Others say it was just the only acceptable excuse to nap in public. You glance at Apollo. He's not pretending. He's not performing. He's just here. And for a moment, that feels rare. The sun dips lower. The shadows stretch long. And the fig tree whispers with every breeze, as if reading from a very old book that only the leaves can understand. Dinner is a 5-hour ordeal. Not in a bad way, well, not entirely, but in a way only 18th century aristocratic dining can be, ornate, excessive, and just slightly absurd. You're seated somewhere in the middle of a 30-person table that feels more like a runway than a piece of furniture. The napkins have been folded into swans. The swans are wearing tiny rosemary wreaths. You suspect someone got promoted over this. Apollo, because of course he is, sits 2 seats down from a Viscount who won't stop talking about pheasants. Not eating them, raising them. They have moods, he says gravely. Spearing a radish. I respect that. The table groans beneath the weight of porcelain terrines, glistening roast, candied dissets, and bread so crusty it might be a weapon in the wrong hands. You're handed a menu longer than your attention span. Somewhere around course 3, you begin to mentally rate things not by taste, but by how difficult they are to eat in polite company. Mainstream historical fact. Meals among 18th century European aristocrats often lasted for hours, with anywhere from 5 to 20 courses depending on the formality. Dining wasn't just about sustenance. It was a ritual of power, elegance, and courtly manners. Every dish was symbolic. Every utensil had a rule, and knowing when to pick up the wrong fork was practically a blood sport. Apollo doesn't eat much. He plays with a sprig of something green and aromatic, flips a tiny quail bone between his fingers, and mostly listens. You, however, dive headfirst into the roasted pears stuffed with walnuts and honey, because some opportunities come once in a century, and this one smells like divine forgiveness. A woman across from you tells a story about fainting during a mass ball because her corset laces were tied by a drunk cousin. Apollo asks, deadpan, "Was a cousin also fainting?" She laughs too loudly, then visibly reevaluates every choice that led her to this table. The chandelier above you is ridiculous. Gold branches, crystal pendants, at least one cherub holding a candle in its outstretched hands like it's done something terribly wrong. Candlelight dances over velvet sleeves and powdered hair, making everyone look a little ghostly, a little mythic. Halfway through the fish course, Apollo finally speaks. "This reminds me of the banquets at Delphi." You raise an eyebrow. "They serve glazed turnips at the temple?" He shrugs. "Not quite, but there were always too many dishes, too many rules, and too much music." You like music? I like silence more. That shuts you up. The woman beside you, wearing teal again, maybe the same from the repose chamber, leans over to ask what you think of the pickled artichoke hearts. You tell her they taste like ambition. She nods. clearly unsure whether you're complimenting the chef or criticizing capitalism. Fringe tidbit. Some aristocrats employed professional tasters whose job wasn't just to test for poison, but also to preview flavor balance, temperature, and presentation. Being one of these tasters was both an honor and a gamble. Historians still argue whether any of them were ever actually poisoned or just died of the stress. By dessert, you've learned 3 things. Caramelized plums are worth every minute of ancestral struggle that led you here. Apollo has a remarkable talent for making nobles confess embarrassing secrets by simply tilting his head and saying, "Oh." The wine steward has a crush on Apollo and is not subtle about it. You're given something called a sleep cordial before the final toast, a sweet, herbal elixir designed to calm the nerves and aid digestion. It tastes like melted licorice mixed with confidence. The table rises, clumsily, slowly. Some guests clearly further into their cups than others. Apollo stands last, silent and steady. You follow him out into the terrace, where cooler air licks your skin and crickets begin their nightly gossip. You both lean against the balustrade. Below, the garden glows in moonlight, all silver leaves and shadows. You can see the glint of marble statues, the quiet shape of the orchard, and someone giggling as they chase a runaway dog past the fountain. Do you miss it? You ask. He doesn't answer right away. I miss being part of something sacred, he says. Not worshipped, just useful. You nod. You are. He looks at you. You don't count, he says, but softly, like he means the opposite. You let silence grow again. Not uncomfortable, just open. Then, from behind, a familiar voice. There you are. The Countess. She's changed into something even more pastel and perfumed, with lace cuffs that probably took 7 people to iron. We're retiring to the music room, she says. Some minor noble brought a harp, and we're going to pretend to enjoy it. Apollo smiles. Wouldn't miss it. He offers you an arm. You take it, mostly to keep from tripping over your own thoughts. The music room is small, round, and over-decorated. There's a painted ceiling featuring a cherub riding a dolphin into a sunset, and you make a silent bet with yourself that it was commissioned by someone drunk on lavender cordial. The harpist is competent, thankfully. The notes drift like warm water, wrapping the edges of the room. Guests settle into low seats and overstuffed settees. Someone lights a few more candles. The shadows grow bolder. Apollo closes his eyes. You wonder if he's remembering something ancient. You wonder if he's letting go. You wonder if maybe the two are the same. And you, tucked into the corner of a room filled with silk and song, feel yourself start to drift towards sleep, towards something quieter than dreams. By morning, the estate is quiet again. You wake up not to music or footsteps or tea being poured, but to the gentle swish of brooms outside your window. Someone is sweeping dew off the marble steps. The sun, barely above the horizon, paints the edges of the drapes in soft gold. You lie there a moment longer, staring at the ceiling's painted cherubs and vaguely regretting the second cordial. The bed is ridiculous, wide enough for 3 people and layered like an overachieving pastry. Silk sheets, embroidered pillows, and a counterpane so heavy it might legally qualify as a guest. It smells faintly of lavender and someone else's perfume. Maybe the Countess's. Maybe time itself. You rise slowly. The floor is cold. The mirror across the room shows a version of yourself that looks well-fed, slightly dazzled and only mildly haunted. Downstairs, breakfast is casual by aristocratic standards, which still means porcelain dishes and fresh quince jam. A footman offers you coffee strong enough to resurrect minor saints. You accept. Twice, Apollo joins you with a nod and a single slice of toast. He looks good, which is annoying. You suspect he could sleep in a pigsty and still wake up with perfect cheekbones. Mainstream historical fact. The 18th century elite had what we now consider wildly inconsistent sleep patterns. It was common for them to rise early, take mid-morning strolls, then nap in the afternoon, and attend social events late into the night. Some nobles even practiced segmented sleep, waking around midnight to write letters, pray, or gossip before returning to bed for a second sleep. Basically, aristocratic insomnia was practically fashionable. You and Apollo eat mostly in silence, until he says, "We're leaving today." You pause, swallow. "Oh, it's time." You nod, even though you hadn't packed, even though part of you had started imagining staying, just for a little while, just long enough to see what a full season looks like in a world of velvet and ritual naps. The Countess appears soon after, sweeping into the room with the grace of someone who's been choreographed since birth. She kisses your cheek, Apollo's hand, and hands each of you a small gift wrapped in silk. "Lavender sachets," she says, "and a jar of my lemon balm elixir for dreaming." You thank her. Apollo bows low. She raises an eyebrow. "You'd be a terrible noble." "Flattery," he replies, deadpan. "From you, I'll allow it." Fringe tidbit. Many aristocrats believe that scented items placed under one's pillow, such as sachets of lavender, chamomile, or even dried orange peels, could ward off bad dreams, attract prophetic visions, or simply help one sleep more deeply. Sleep hygiene, 18th century style, was all about fragrance, fabric, and faint superstition. By midday, your things are loaded into a modest carriage, nothing like the ornate vehicles lined up for hunting parties. Just a simple wooden cart with a padded bench and a linen canopy. Apollo climbs in first. You follow. The Countess waves. The estate shrinks behind you like a dream pulling away from morning light. The road is dustier than you remember. "I liked it there," you say. "I know. You did too." He doesn't argue. The oxen move at a steady pace. Trees blur past. A hawk glides overhead, casting a fleeting shadow across the cart. After a while, Apollo pulls something from his satchel, a thin volume of poetry bound in worn leather. He opens to a random page, reads aloud. The words are in Greek, but his voice makes them clear enough. Sorrow and beauty in equal parts. A line about night blooming more honestly than day. You lean your head back, eyes half closed, and let the rhythm of wheels and wind and verse lull you into something soft. Historians still argue whether aristocratic sleep was truly restful or just another layer of performance. Cloaked in silks and etiquette, did they dream of freedom, of love, of escape, or were their slumbers simply pauses between performances, brief intermissions before the next act of civility? Apollo stops reading. "Do you think sleep matters more when you don't have to earn it?" he asks. You blink. Maybe, or maybe you just notice it more when it's no longer survival. He nods. The road bends. A breeze carries the scent of rosemary from some hidden garden. In the distance, you see another estate, Smaller, simpler, tucked between fields like a child forgotten at a banquet. You pass it without stopping. The afternoon deepens. Shadows lengthen. Apollo hums a tune you recognize from the music room. It sounds different out here, less polished, more alive. You smile, because you're not sure what's ahead. But for the first time in a while, you're okay with that. And when Apollo finally says, "We'll stop soon," you nod and lean back into the cushions. Your eyes drift shut. And this time, the sleep is yours. Not borrowed, not gilded, not wrapped in tradition. Just quiet. You wake to the sound of frogs. Not the elegant kind carved into fountains or embroidered on noblemen's slippers, but real ones, down by the river you must have stopped beside sometime after dusk. The air is cooler here, thick with the smell of wet grass and wood smoke. Crickets chirp like they're late for a concert, and the moon is doing its best impression of a candle behind linen. Soft, pale, unsure. Apollo sits nearby, poking a fire that clearly doesn't need poking. He glances over. You slept hard. You sit up slowly. The blanket you didn't remember receiving slips down your shoulder. Your back is stiff, your mouth dry, and yet you feel oddly peaceful, like your body finally remembered how to rest without asking permission. "Where are we?" you ask. "Halfway to nowhere," he replies, tossing another stick into flames. "It's a nice place." You stretch, wince, and agree. Dinner, or what remains of it, is a crust of bread, a wedge of questionable cheese, and a flask of something warm that makes your ears tingle. You eat with your fingers, sitting cross-legged in the grass, listening to frogs continue their symphony of whatever frogs care about. Mainstream historical fact. Despite their wealth, 18th century aristocrats often took part in pastoral retreats. Short period in the countryside meant to restore the body and spirit. Inspired by Enlightenment ideals and classical philosophy, nobles believed that sleep in nature or nature-themed backdrops was more restorative. Some even had elaborately styled rustic cottages built on their estates to fake the experience of roughing it. Minus the mosquitoes, of course. This isn't one of those fake cottages. This is actual outside, and you love it more than you expect. Apollo hums again, a soft tune that drifts upward like chimney smoke. He's staring at the stars like they're speaking in Morse code. You lie back in the grass, arms folded under your head, and try to translate the sky. Did nobles ever stargaze like this? You murmur. He shrugs. Only when it was fashionable. But it feels so normal. Human. Exactly. You both go quiet again, letting the night fold in around you. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hoots like it's trying to impress someone. The fire crackles softly. Then Apollo, still watching the stars, says, "Did you know some nobles trained their servants to wake them up every few hours just so they could record their dreams?" You blink. "Wait, seriously?" He nods. They thought midnight dreams were prophetic, especially if they happened in the second sleep. Fringe tidbit. In elite 18th century circles, there were documented cases of aristocrats waking voluntarily in the middle of the night to write down dreams, sip herbal tonics, or conduct spiritual readings. Dream journals became status symbols in some households, though some scholars argue whether these journals held true psychological significance or were merely another aristocratic flex. You imagine a footman tiptoeing in, gently shaking his master awake, only to be met with a sleepy, "Did the unicorn speak Latin this time?" You snort. Apollo smirks. You're picturing it, aren't you? You are, and it's glorious. The logs settle, collapsing inward with a hiss of embers. You pull the blanket closer and let your mind drift. Historians still argue whether these midnight rituals were forms of introspection or just fashionable distractions, an 18th century version of doom scrolling with incense. Either way, the boundary between sleep and wakefulness was a lot blurrier back then. People drifted in and out of consciousness like it was an art form. And maybe it was. You close your eyes again just for a moment. The sound soften. The stars blur. The frogs seem to hush just a little. And you begin to imagine what your own dream journal would look like. Maybe a sketch of Apollo falling into a duck pond. Maybe a poem about sheep with French accents. Or just a single line, slept like someone who earned it. You smile at that, and then you're gone again, floating. The night folding itself around you like the world's softest cloak. You don't remember waking, just the soft awareness of being warm, and the scent of earth that feels familiar now, like an old sweater or a dog you grew up with. The sun is rising again, but this time it takes its time. No blazing entrance, just a quiet unfolding, like it knows you're not ready to face the day with both eyes open. Apollo's already up, of course. He's down by the creek, washing his face with a cupped handful of water. His tunic is wrinkled beyond redemption, and there's a twig in his hair that he either doesn't know about or has adopted as a fashion statement. You shuffle over to join him, wincing as you stretch. Every joint makes a tiny protest sound, like a choir of mildly offended mice. "You good?" he asks, handing you a small cloth. You wipe your face with the damp linen. It smells like time and smoke. "I'm a collection of regrets held together by breadcrumbs," you mutter. "Perfect," he grins. "You'll blend right in at the manor." "Oh no, today is noble visiting day." You'd hoped it was a joke, some pastoral prank involving wine and cheap wigs. But no. Apollo leads you toward the distant hills, where a grand estate rises in pale stone and meticulously disinterested architecture. You approach through a vineyard that seems too symmetrical to be natural. Workers clip vines with gold-handled shears. A fountain murmurs somewhere just out of sight. Birds chirp in suspicious harmony. Mainstream historical fact. Many aristocratic estates in the 18th century were designed to mimic the Roman ideal of rural serenity, complete with artificial ruins, sculpted hedges, and perfectly engineered acoustics that made even a cough echo charmingly. You pass a marble sundial, 2 sleepy greyhounds, and a gardener who may or may not be asleep upright. Apollo waves at no one in particular, and a butler materializes from behind a column. The man is wearing stockings, so white they might be divine. His powdered wig defies physics. He nods at Apollo with a familiarity that's deeply unsettling. Lord something or other is expecting you. The butler says he's just finishing his nap. It's not even 9 a.m. You glance at Apollo. What kind of nap is that? "Third nap," he says, deadpan. It follows a pre-waking tea nap and precedes a correspondence lounge. You walk silently through the halls, which are lined with oil portraits of people who look like they've never experienced indigestion or humility. A harpsichord tinkles somewhere. You're led into a drawing room with furniture that looks allergic to comfort and upholstery, so embroidered it might count as a cousin to lace. There's a small bell on a side table. Apollo rings it. The butler reappears with a silver tray bearing toast, and something that might be jam or revenge. You sit awkwardly on a chaise that's both too short and too grand. Apollo lounges like he was born on a fainting couch. Eventually, Lord Something or Other arrives in a role with more buttons than personality. He yawns, stretches, and begins a monologue about the importance of controlled sleep regimens among the enlightened elite. Fringe tidbit. In the late 18th century, some aristocrats adopted experimental sleep schedules, including polyphasic sleep, segmented rest, and even lucid dreaming salons where they attempted to induce group visions. Some were fascinated by sleep's link to creativity and power. Others just liked the drama. Lord Button Overload gestures vaguely toward a velvet curtain, behind which lies a nap room. You peek in. There are 3 beds, one for napping, one for reflecting upon the nap, and one for writing about the nap in an imported Moroccan dream journal. Historians still argue whether these nap-centric rituals were genuine explorations of rest science, or if they were just opulent ways of avoiding their responsibilities. Either way, nobles were rarely just sleeping. They were experimenting, showcasing, and in some cases competing. Apollo leans close. Want to try the 3rd bed? You shake your head. I barely survived the first nap. Still, you're handed a chilled lavender cloth and encouraged to experience the curated rest environment. You lie back on a bed that probably costs more than your hometown, and weirdly you sleep only for 10 minutes. But when you wake, someone has placed a candied fig on your chest. You have never been more confused or mildly honored. Later, out in the estate's garden, you sip a tea that tastes like boiled silk and rose petals. Apollo is humming again, and you recognize the tune. It's the one from the fire, from the stars, from the field of frogs. And somehow, it doesn't feel out of place. Because even in a palace, surrounded by wigs and waistcoats, Apollo's still the same. Maybe sleep isn't just about rest. Maybe it's about where you can be yourself, whether that's under a sky full of frogs or in a bed made for poetry naps. You lean back, close your eyes, and for once, the cushion doesn't argue. The carriage ride back from the estate is surprisingly quiet. You'd expected Apollo to make some sarcastic remark about noble napping etiquette or the linen-frothed teacups that looked more like thimbles with egos. But he doesn't. He just watches the countryside blur past, one elbow resting lazily on the window frame, his fingers absently tapping a soft rhythm you can't quite place. The sheep fields appear again like a long-forgotten memory. You're back among the crooked fences, wandering goats, and the sweetly awful smell of something cooking over a fire that should be reclassified as a health hazard. Home, apparently. You stretch your legs, rubbing your lower back like a peasant twice your age, and rejoin the other shepherds near the pasture. One of them offers you a hunk of bread. Another pretends not to see the extremely noble fig still tucked into your pocket. Mainstream historical fact. Sleep among the lower classes in the 18th century was vastly different from the elite's curated rituals. Most peasants slept in communal rooms, sometimes even with animals, often in 2 segments. First sleep and second sleep, separated by an hour or 2 of wakefulness used for prayer, mending clothes, or quiet conversation. That fragmented cycle was considered normal, even healthy, by many. You think about this as you toss another log onto the fire. Because even after silk cushions and aromatic oils, there's something comforting about sleeping among friends. Even if one of those friends routinely hums in ancient modes and once turned a mountain into a metaphor. Apollo joins you after a while. He doesn't say much, just sits close enough that you can feel the warmth radiating from him like a portable hearth. Back to peasant life, you murmur, pulling your cloak tighter. He shrugs. The stars look the same here. You glance up. They do. The sky is clear tonight, ink black with a dusting of gold. The kind of night where thoughts float freely, and the air smells like baked bread and smoke, and the sort of peace that only comes after a long day with nothing left to prove. Fringe tidbit. Some rural households believe that dreams sent during the second sleep were prophetic, not because of divine influence, but because the soul had finally relaxed into truth-telling. These dreams were often shared at breakfast and interpreted communally. There's even evidence of dream exchange practices in certain regions, like sleepy morning trading cards of subconscious. Apollo is staring into the fire now, not solemnly, just gently. You think they dream like us? You ask. He doesn't respond right away. Then, I think we dream like them. You poke the fire, sparks dancing up into the darkness. Someone plays a flute badly. Someone else swears at a goat that's chewing on someone else's sandal. And still peace. Historians still argue whether Apollo's time among mortals was punishment or preservation. Some believe he needed to be humbled. Others say the exile was a way to store him safely, away from Olympus and its politics, away from his own power, which could burn so brightly it singed the very threads of fate. But tonight, watching him lean back on his elbows, tunic dusty, cheeks sun-flushed and full of flatbread, he just looks human. No laurels, no temples, just laughter and firelight, and that same ancient melody he always returns to. You stretch out on your blanket, the ground surprisingly forgiving. Someone tosses you a half-roasted chestnut. You eat it without question. Above, the stars pulse gently, like slow breathing. The sky doesn't judge. It just listens. You listen too. You feel the night drape over you, soft as a wool shawl, familiar as an old tune. The goats settle. The shepherds fall quiet. Apollo hums something you think is older than language. And for a while, everything is still. So here you are, back where you began, only now the world feels softer, like it's exhale with you. The flicker of firelight fades gently across your eyelids, casting warm shadows that stretch and settle, like sleepy cats along a windowsill. You breathe in. The night carries a faint scent of dew and ash and something green, olive wood, maybe. It's quiet now, in that perfect way the world can be when no one's demanding anything. Just silence and stars and the slow rhythm of your own heartbeat in your chest. Apollo is beside you. Maybe you can still hear his hum. Maybe it's just the wind brushing the tall grass. It doesn't matter. There's nothing left to do. You let your body sink deeper into the earth's slow embrace, the ground no longer cold or hard, but part of something ancient and reassuring. You're not just lying on dirt, you're resting in history, in centuries of footsteps and laughter and sleep. The same sleep that held shepherds and gods alike. You drift, thoughts scatter like dandelion seeds, caught in the hush between now and later. You remember the fig, the lyre, the sheep with judgmental eyes. You remember the way stars look from a noble's bed, and how they look exactly the same now. And in that sameness, you find peace. Because maybe that's the secret. Maybe rest isn't about the feather pillows or the second naps or the dream-led rituals. Maybe it's about allowing yourself to let go. You're safe. You're warm. And tonight, Sleep finds you easily, like it's been waiting. Good night.